Neophyte Castor has been a scout for exactly 6 weeks and 3 days. He has passed every test: pain threshold, doctrine retention, live fire execution. On day 46, he raises his hand during an apothecary orientation lecture. He asks, 19 organs go in. Where does anything come out? Sergeant Dorian has served this chapter 80 years without sitting down voluntarily. He reads the question form and then sits on an empty equipment crate. He has not sat during active hours in all 80 years of prior service. Apothecary Varick has delivered this orientation 400 times without a single incident. He checks volume 4 of the Chirurgeon's manual, which covers all implant function. Volume 4 documents what every organ does with exceptional liturgical precision in prayer. It does not mention what happens to the processed biological material after processing. He calls Senior Apothecary Holt, who has served for 2 full centuries. Holt also pauses. Holt also reads the manual. Same result. Nothing anywhere. They convene an emergency consultation using the appropriate administratum request form. The form is reserved for emergencies of doctrine, heresy, or structural chapter failure. Which category? Asks the clerk. Holt writes, biological administrative oversight. The clerk stamps it with no apparent recognition of what he just processed today. 11 volumes cover space marine biology, installation, function, maintenance, and prayer. Every volume documents input in detail. 0 volumes follow the output anywhere. Castor is still sitting outside the room, unaware of what he has started. The Chirurgeon's manual was compiled by Apothecary-Prime Moors in the 33rd millennium. Moors documented the preomnor in exceptional detail. A second preparatory stomach. It neutralizes raw meat, toxic fungi, mineral compounds, and certain low-grade promethium variants. Everything the preomnor processes is neutralized and then passed forward for true digestion. Passed forward is the exact language Moors used in this biological documentation passage. Forward to where? Apothecary-Prime Moors. The manual does not follow this up. Holt has performed over 1,000 implantations across 2 full centuries of service. He has never, in 2 centuries, been asked where any of the output goes. He thinks about that now and realizes he has also never once wondered. That bothers him more than the original question ever could have. The oolitic kidney is the organ most directly relevant to Castor's filed question. It works in sequence with the preomnor as a 2-stage internal filtration system. Stage 1. The preomnor neutralizes toxins before the true stomach ever encounters them. Stage 2. The oolitic kidney filters the blood of anything that slipped past. Between both organs, a space marine survives poisons that kill 10 normal baseline humans. The filtrate from stage 2 has to go somewhere in the body afterward. The manual states it is processed and expelled with appropriate biological efficiency. Appropriate biological efficiency. That is the full citation. That is all Moors wrote. Holt reads it 3 times and finds no follow-up passage anywhere in the volume. He makes a note. Moors either knew and chose not to say, or never asked. I think Moors never asked. I think Holt is too polite to say that directly. He files a request to the Adeptus Mechanicus Biologist Division, marked Standard Priority. Standard on a Tier 3 Mechanicus inquiry means an expected 40-year response window. He files it anyway and copies Castor on the confirmation receipt, out of spite. Meanwhile, Castor has begun independent research in the Scout Librarium's 3 biology volumes. Volume 1 covers the heart, the bone, the blood enhancement cascade in sequence. Volume 2 covers the eye, the ear, the nose, the full chemical palette. Volume 3 stops mid-chapter on the subject of the Betcher's gland. The Betcher's gland produces a corrosive acid near the salivary gland cluster. A space marine can spit acid capable of dissolving metal at close range. The gland's mechanics draw from what the text calls biological metabolic processes for production. Castor reads that phrase twice. He's already seen that phrase in Moore's original manual. He goes back to Varick's office with a new, worse follow-up question attached. If the Betcher's gland produces acid from metabolic processes, something biological has to enter. That input must come from somewhere being processed elsewhere in the body first. The acid exits through the mouth. The question is, what feeds the gland upstream? Varick reads the follow-up question and sits on the same crate as Dorian used. There is now a crate in his wing used exclusively for receiving devastating documentation. Castor submits the question as Appendix A of his inquiry. Still a scout. The omophagia allows a space marine to absorb genetic memory through consumed enemy flesh. Index Astartes Volume 2 documents the discovery and mechanism with appropriate reverence. What happens to the flesh after the memory absorption is not mentioned or addressed. The implication is that the flesh still has to be processed somewhere after that. The memory enters the brain. The protein still has to go somewhere else entirely. Castor logs this as Appendix B. His inquiry file is now 12 full pages. The Scout Librarium had one shelf of chapter-specific field reports near the back wall. Castor found the Blood Angels file first, the Red Thirst, Appendix B1. Their omophagia developed a specific craving response tied to Sanguinius's final biological moment. The secondary stomach wants blood, not as nutrition, but as inherited compulsion. In Devastation of Bile, Guy Haley frames this not as affliction but as communion. They built centuries of theology around what a digestive malfunction demands from them. The Blood Angels solved their waste problem by converting it into their entire belief system, which is the most Space Marine approach to a biological flaw anyone has ever documented. The Space Wolves file was thicker. Castor reads it standing up. Appendix B2. The Canis Helix enhances their omophagia beyond any other chapter's documented baseline entirely. In Prospero Burns by Den Abnett, consuming something means tasting its entire lived experience. Every meal is a memory library. Every enemy consumed is an archive of sensation, beautiful and horrible in exactly equal measure, which tracks for Space Wolves generally. Their famous compulsion to recount events at length after feasts is not cultural tradition. It is memory integration. Eating and remembering are the same biological act for them. Castor ate his field ration that evening and felt significantly less enthusiastic about it. The Lamentors file was thin. Their omophagia absorbs less cleanly than standard gene seed, logged as a genetic flaw in Badab records under gene seed assessment protocol. The Lamentors are the unluckiest chapter in 40k. Their stomachs are also unlucky. This tracks. Everything about the Lamentors is consistently unfortunate across every campaign. Mechanicus assessment came back within acceptable variance both times they were tested. Their gene lineage is not a legacy lineage. Nobody explained the discrepancy in writing. The Thousand Suns file occupied exactly one page. Castor read it in under a minute. Most Thousand Suns are animated armor, with no biological occupant piloting the shell. Rubric Marines are dust and will inside sealed ceramite. No biology, no waste. The Thousand Suns solved the waste problem by not having a body anymore. This is technically the most efficient solution available. It is also a war crime. Castor closed the file. Added Appendix B5. Chapter variance confirms no universal answer exists. Pell, a neophyte who has been watching from the corridor, asks if he is in trouble. Castor says he doesn't know yet. He has been waiting 3.5 hours. Pell says that's not a good sign. Castor does not disagree with this reading. A chapter serf who sweeps the apothecary corridor has also stopped sweeping during this. He has cleaned this hallway for 11 years without filing a single personal inquiry. He is now asking questions internally, quietly, with significant personal and professional distress. The catalepsia node reduces a Space Marine sleep requirement from 8 hours to 4. The Index Astartes documents it fully. It was among the first fully mapped organs. What the reduced sleep cycle does to the overall metabolic processing rate is unaddressed. Less sleep might mean a different metabolic rhythm, or it might mean something much worse. Holt makes a note. Varek reads the note. Both of them stare at the ceiling. The Susan membrane induces and sustains complete suspended animation when triggered by an apothecary. A trained apothecary activates the membrane and all biological processes freeze indefinitely. All biological processes is the exact language in the founding Mechanicus documentation on this. When the Space Marine is revived, those processes resume from exactly where they paused. Castor reads, resume from exactly where they paused, and sits down on the floor directly. Pell sits next to him. Neither of them says anything for a considerable amount of time. The chapter's records confirm multiple Marines revived from confirmed century-length stasis events. None of the revival documentation includes any post-revival biological incident report at all. Castor adds, unless it was filed under a different category to his inquiry notes, the closest matching administratum category is unforeseen biological event during standard revival procedure. This form was created by someone at some point, which implies there was a prior reason. He logs this as Appendix C. The inquiry is now at 27 full pages. The mucranoid is the organ that secretes substances through the skin under appropriate stimulus. In vacuum conditions, it seals every pore to protect the marine against void exposure. Pores, under normal conditions, participate actively in metabolic gas and trace material exchange. When all pores are sealed, the body reroutes those processes elsewhere through internal channels. These rerouted channels are referenced in the documentation but never tracked or mapped further. Varric adds this to his own list, which has become a full spiral-bound volume. He shows Holt the volume. Holt says, "Please stop showing me the list." Holt files a supplementary inquiry to the Mechanicus, this time marked urgent priority level. Urgent on a tier 3 form reduces the expected response time to 20 years. He records this as a procedural success. He means it without any irony at all. Every century had a different Apothecary-Prime, with a different preferred euphemism for this subject. Mors chose passes it forward. Telvan wrote biologically resolved. Harkon used expelled cleanly, and 8 others after them across 8,000 years each chose a different word that sounded like a full answer and wasn't, which is either a tradition or a conspiracy. And at this point, Castor is not entirely sure the difference matters. Castor has found that phrase mapped across 14 sources now, organized by century. Varric reads the timeline and does not enjoy seeing himself in the final column. He schedules a formal debrief, which is also the first formal meeting of the inquiry. The debrief is officially for the purpose of asking Castor to stop all further filing. Castor arrives with 63 pages of documentation and a politely attentive expression. Varric says, "You have raised questions this chapter is not equipped to formally address." Castor says he understands and would like to file a follow-up on that specific statement. He does. He is not disciplined. He is not stopped. He is told, "The chapter thanks you for your thoroughness and will respond when resources allow." That is also Tier 3. Response window, 40 years, pending availability of appropriate resources. Castor, still a scout, understands he will be a full battle brother before any answer arrives. He finds this clarifying in a way that also, quietly, unsettles him. He returns to training. He does not stop asking the question inside his own head. The Mechanicus response arrives 11 years later, which is genuinely early for Tier 3 filing. Castor is a full battle brother now, Fenris and back, 3 confirmed campaigns logged. The response is a document cover sheet referencing a second separate document by number. The second document, Biology's reference, Astartes metabolic cascade, secondary clearance required. Secondary clearance means Castor, as a battle brother, does not have current access. He files for clearance elevation. That form is Tier 2. Expected response, 15 years. He receives a courtesy summary in the meantime. The summary is exactly 1 page long. The courtesy summary states, Astartes' metabolic output is designed for efficiency and discretion. Efficiency receives 3 lines of technical definition. Discretion is not defined anywhere on the page. He writes, passes it forward in the margin. Mors' tradition continues into a new millennium. One person studied all of this more carefully than any Apothecary-Prime across 10 millennia, Fabius Bile. His conclusions are classified extensively heretical and in several cases correct. Bile spent his post-heresy existence obsessed with finding flaws in the Emperor's engineering. In Josh Reynolds' Fabius Bile trilogy, his motivation is compulsive and honestly embarrassing. He wanted to surpass the Emperor's design and needed to find where it actually failed. He audited every organ, ran centuries of experiments. The digestive system came back perfect. Bile ran 17 distinct experimental pre-stomach variants across 3 centuries of field trials. None of those 17 exceeded baseline preomner efficiency by a measurable margin at all. Bile reportedly destroyed his lab notes on the subject. We can speculate on why. What Bile actually concluded, research the Inquisition spent considerable effort burning, was simple. The Emperor removed bodily need as a variable. He also removed what came bundled with it. Bile called it a design flaw. The Emperor almost certainly considered it a feature. Castor does not have access to Bile's research. Nobody with clearance below Inquisitorial does, but the conclusion would not have surprised him. The answer was always architectural, not biological. The full document, accessed finally at veteran rank, is exactly 400 pages. Page 1 confirms. Space Marines produce significantly less biological waste than baseline human anatomy. The oolitic kidney and preomner together achieve near total internal nutrient recycling on the record. What cannot be recycled is handled via what the document refers to as minimal expulsion events. Minimal expulsion events. 400 pages of Mechanicus research. That phrase is what arrived. The document does not define what threshold constitutes minimal in any biological context whatsoever. He reads page 2 through 400 to determine if minimal is ever actually quantified. Page 68 mentions Marines in sealed power armor have integrated suit processing systems. These systems manage what the biology produces, using the armor's own engineering infrastructure. This is noted with perfect institutional calm in Volume 2 of the Power Armor Manual. Castor did not read the Power Armor Maintenance Manual. Nobody indicated it was relevant here. He checks Volume 2, page 3. 3 sentences, sitting there. Calm as a prayer. 23 years. 67 pages across 21 appendices. 3 sentences on page 3. The Chirurgeon's Manual does not reference the Power Armor Maintenance Manual anywhere. The Power Armor Maintenance Manual makes no reference to the Chirurgeon's Manual in return. 2 complete documentation systems. One question, neither one ever thought to cite the other. He thinks about Moors and Telvan and Harkon and their very careful vocabulary choices. None of them cited page 3. Maybe they read it, maybe they chose not to say. The institutional silence is, it turns out, several layers deep and deliberate by design. He reads the 3 sentences again and then writes them out in full by hand. He adds them to the inquiry as Appendix R, Final Appendix. The inquiry is complete. He stamps it. Resolved, pending further review. That is the correct procedural language here. The form does not offer an option reading, resolved but fundamentally, personally unsatisfying. He looks for that option anyway. He cannot find it. He is a Space Marine. He submits the resolved filing. The Administratum closes the case with a standard form. Sergeant Dorian, 80 years older than the day this inquiry began, receives a copy. He reads it, sets it down. He walks to the armory and retrieves the crate. The crate he sat on 30 years ago when Castor asked the original question. He carries it back to the armory rack and replaces it exactly where it belongs. He does not speak about this. He does not speak about this ever again. That evening, Castor eats a field ration and thinks through what he actually learned. He learned that Space Marines produce minimal waste because they recycle nearly everything internally. He learned that the biology and the armor were designed as one integrated system. He learned that nobody in 10,000 years connected those 2 documentation sources together. He learned that everyone who got close chose a word that meant it's handled. He thinks about what it means when biology becomes too efficient to require a real answer. A baseline human asks this, and the answer takes about 4 seconds. No forms required. A Space Marine asks, and it takes 23 years in a maintenance manual's 3rd page. The distance between those 2 answers is the distance between human and Astartes. Not the strength, not the speed, not the gene seed or the battlefield performance. The distance is that his humanity never needed a form filed on its behalf before. He was rebuilt, enhanced, and his own biology became a matter of doctrine and record. His body became the chapter's concern. His functions became subject to institutional procedure. That is the deal. That is what being made Astartes cost. The Imperium filed his humanity under secondary clearance. Castor does not object to this. He chose it. He would choose it again. He chose it knowing almost nothing about it. That is also in the documentation somewhere, probably. He hasn't found the appendix yet. Castor is a full veteran now, 60 years from the day he raised his hand. His inquiry has been closed, archived in the librarium under the letter M. M for miscellaneous, M for metabolic, M for matters best handled with institutional discretion. He doesn't visit the archive. He has moved on to other questions about other things. On Vortex 4, against Chaos forces in the outer reaches, he eats a fallen warrior, the Omophageia, absorbs a fragment of the warrior's genetic memory through the consumed flesh. Most of the memory is battle context, fear, conviction, the specific moment of dying. But there is a fragment from early training, years before the warrior ever fought. The warrior had been asking about the strange biology of chaos-altered soldiers around him. Where does it go? He had asked. What happens to what the mutation produces? His sergeants had looked at each other. Nobody in the warband had answered him. He had asked once and never filed anything. He had never asked a second time. Castor finishes the field ration, the memory, and the Omophagia's particular inherited gift. He thinks at least he had the courtesy to submit the inquiry in writing. The inquiry is in the librarium under M, 67 pages with Appendix G fully intact. 67 pages on a question the armor had answered on page 3 the whole time. The Ulitic kidney handles it. The armor contains it. Moors passed it forward. The tradition, it turns out, was never going to stop without someone filing the paperwork. Castor returns to the campaign. Enemies to engage. Forms to submit in full triplicate. Both feel like progress. Only one requires secondary clearance.